The stars burned cold and distant as the Krell warships moved through the darkness like hunting wolves. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn and watched the battle screens with a sinking feeling in his chest. The Galactic Coalition had stood strong for 3,000 years, but now everything was falling apart. Ship after ship disappeared from the tactical display, as the Krell weapons tore through shields and armor like they were made of paper. Jake had fought in border skirmishes before, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so much like the end of everything. The Coalition was an alliance of 17 species who had come together to build something better than the wars and conflicts of the past. They traded with each other and shared knowledge and protected each other from threats. Or at least they were supposed to. The Krell had appeared 4 months ago from the outer rim where no one had explored much. They came in massive black ships that seemed to swallow light itself. Their first attack destroyed an entire colony world before anyone even knew they were there. The Coalition sent diplomatic envoys to make contact and establish communication. The Krell sent back the ships in pieces with all the crew dead. That was when everyone understood that this enemy did not want to talk or negotiate or find common ground. They wanted only to conquer and destroy. Admiral Liu's voice crackled across the fleet communication channel. She sounded tired, and Jake knew she had not slept in 2 days. All ships fall back to defensive position Gamma. Regroup at the rally point and prepare for tactical withdrawal. But there were so few ships left to hear her orders. The Coalition fleet had started with nearly 200 vessels defending this sector. Now Jake counted maybe 40 still functioning. The rest were debris or burning wrecks drifting through space. The Krell just kept coming with more ships and better weapons and strategies that seemed designed to counter everything the Coalition tried. On the planet below, the space battle raged on in the atmosphere above. Lieutenant Amy Rogers crouched behind a broken wall on Andara Prime and fired her plasma rifle at the advancing Krell soldiers. The sky was orange and red with burning ships and falling debris. She could hear the screams of civilians trying to reach the evacuation transports and the constant thunder of explosions as Krell landing craft touched down across the city. Amy had been stationed on Andara Prime for 2 years, and she loved this world with its purple forests and kind people who had welcomed the Coalition peacekeepers with open arms. Now she was watching it die. "Get those transports off the ground now," Amy shouted into her communicator while ducking as a plasma bolt sizzled past her head. The civilian ships were overloaded with refugees and lifting off one by one. But there were still thousands of people waiting, and the Krell were getting closer. She could see them clearly now. They stood 8 feet tall in biometallic armor that seemed to grow from their bodies rather than being worn. Their weapons were built into their arms, and they moved with terrible purpose through the streets, killing anyone who stood in their way. Amy's squad had started with 20 soldiers from 4 different species. Now she had 6 people left, and they were almost out of ammunition. A Krell soldier turned the corner, and Amy fired 3 times, hitting it in the chest. The armor cracked but did not break, and the creature kept coming. She fired again and again until finally it fell, but 2 more appeared behind it. "We need to fall back," one of her squad members shouted. "The transports are away. We did what we could." Amy wanted to argue that there were still people down there, still civilians who needed help. But she knew he was right. They had done everything possible, and staying longer would just mean dying for nothing. She ordered the retreat, and her squad ran for the extraction point while the city burned behind them. Within 3 hours, Andara Prime had fallen completely. The Krell moved through the planet like a plague, setting up their dark towers and converting the atmosphere to something toxic for the native species. Within 3 days, they had moved on to the next system, leaving only death behind. And within a week, the Coalition capital world of Synthesis was under siege. The great towers where the Council met and made decisions for the good of all species were now surrounded by Krell ships. The orbital defense platforms fought bravely, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. The Coalition was losing this war badly, and no one knew how to stop it. In the council chambers, deep underground, representatives from all 17 species gathered for what might be their final meeting. They argued and blamed each other, and tried to find solutions that did not exist. Some wanted to surrender and hope the Krell would show mercy. Others wanted to fight to the last ship and the last soldier. But everyone kept coming back to the same question: where were the humans? Earth had been part of the Coalition once. Humanity had contributed their ships and soldiers and scientists to the Great Alliance. But that was 30 years ago, before the Treaty of Centauri changed everything. The Council had been afraid of humanity back then. Humans were too aggressive, too militaristic, too unpredictable. They built weapons when others built gardens. They trained soldiers when others trained artists. The Council had given them an ultimatum. Disarm your fleet and surrender your military research or face isolation from the Coalition. Humanity had chosen isolation. For 30 years, no one had heard from Earth. Human ships stopped traveling the trade routes. Human diplomats stopped attending council meetings. The borders of human space were closed, and any ship that tried to enter was turned away with polite but firm warnings. Some species thought humans had collapsed without Coalition support. Others thought they had simply decided they were better off alone. A few wondered if they were planning something, but those voices were dismissed as paranoid. After all, what could one species do against the might of the Coalition? And now the Coalition was dying and Earth remained silent. Messages sent to human space went unanswered. Pleas for help were met with nothing but silence. It seemed that humanity had decided the Coalition's fate was not their problem. They had been cast out, and now they were content to watch from behind their borders while everyone else burned. Jake stood at his post on the Valiant Dawn as the ship limped toward Refuge Station. It was the Coalition's last major stronghold, and behind it were the evacuation fleets carrying millions of civilians. If Refuge Station fell, then the Krell would have a clear path to every remaining Coalition world. The defense fleet gathered there was pathetic. Maybe 50 ships total against the hundreds that the Krell would bring. Jake knew the mathematics. He had run the simulations. There was no scenario where the Coalition won this fight. They would make their stand at Refuge Station and they would die there. And that would be the end of 3,000 years of peace and cooperation. The Krell would inherit the galaxy and all the species that had worked so hard to build something better would be wiped away like dust. Amy arrived at Refuge Station on one of the last transports from Endara Prime. She walked through the crowded halls where refugees from a dozen worlds huddled together in fear. Children cried and adults tried to comfort them, while knowing there was no real comfort to give. The station's commander was organizing the civilians into the deep shelter areas, where they might survive if the station's hull was breached. Might survive. That was the best hope anyone had now. Amy found herself in the pilot ready room where fighter crews were preparing for the coming battle. She was not a pilot, but she knew how to fire a gun, and they needed every person who could fight. A reptilian Sauron pilot named Vera nodded to her as she entered. "You ever been in a fighter before?" Vera asked. Amy shook her head. "Well, you are about to learn," Vera said with a grim smile. "We launch in 6 hours. Try not to throw up in the cockpit." The Krell fleet was 3 days away and closing fast. Every species in the Coalition sent what ships they could spare, but it was not enough. It would never be enough. Admiral Liu stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity's End and looked at the tactical display showing the impossible odds. She had commanded fleets for 50 years, and she had never faced anything like this. The Krell were not just strong, they were smart and adaptable and utterly without mercy. Every tactic the Coalition tried, they countered. Every weapon the Coalition used, they matched. It was like fighting an enemy that had studied every battle the Coalition had ever fought and learned from every mistake they had ever made. Liu wondered if maybe humanity had been right to build their war machines and train their soldiers. Maybe the Coalition had grown too soft during the long peace. Maybe they had forgotten that the universe was not always kind to those who chose peace over strength. But it was too late for those thoughts now. The die was cast and the battle would come, and the Coalition would fight because there was nothing else left to do. Jake Harrison looked out at the stars and thought about Earth. He had never been there, but he had met humans. Before the isolation, they were strange people, always moving, always building, always pushing forward. Other species were content with what they had, but humans always wanted more. More knowledge, more territory, more challenges to overcome. The Coalition had feared that drive, but Jake had always found it fascinating. He wondered what humans had been doing for 30 years behind their closed borders. He wondered if they even knew the Coalition was dying. And he wondered if they would care. Probably not, he decided. Humanity had been rejected and cast out. Why would they risk anything to save the people who had abandoned them? It was a foolish hope, and Jake tried to push it from his mind. The Coalition would stand alone and fight alone and die alone. That was the reality. There would be no rescue, no miracle, no hope. When the Krell came, they would sweep away the last defenders, and that would be the end. All they could do now was make sure the end meant something. Make sure they fought hard enough that the Krell would remember. Make sure that even in death the Coalition stood for something worth dying for. That would have to be enough. Captain Laura Bennett remembered the day everything changed for humanity with perfect clarity. She had been 26 years old and serving as a junior officer aboard the USS Defender when the Coalition Council delivered their ultimatum to Earth. The message had been broadcast across every human world and every human ship. Humanity was too dangerous, they said, too aggressive and too focused on military power. The other species had decided that humans needed to be controlled for the good of the galaxy. Disarm your fleets and surrender your weapons research, or face complete isolation from the Coalition. No trade and no diplomatic contact and no protection under Coalition law. Earth would be alone. Laura had stood on the bridge of the Defender and watched her captain's face turn red with anger. "We built this alliance as much as anyone else," Captain Morris had said. "We fought beside them and bled beside them, and now they want us to roll over and bare our throats." Laura had not known what Earth would decide, but she knew what she hoped. She hoped humanity would tell the Coalition exactly where they could put their ultimatum. And that was exactly what happened. President Richard Hayes stood before the Coalition Council in the Great Chamber on Synthesis and spoke words that would echo through human history. "You ask us to disarm because you fear our strength. You ask us to trust you while showing us you do not trust us. We refuse. Humanity will stand alone if we must, but we will stand armed and ready. We will not surrender our ability to defend ourselves to anyone." The Coalition representatives had been shocked. Some had argued for patience and others for immediate sanctions. In the end, they chose isolation. All human ships were expelled from Coalition space. All trade agreements were canceled. All diplomatic channels were closed. Earth and her colonies were cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Many species thought humanity would collapse within a decade. How could one species survive without the resources and knowledge of the Coalition? But those species did not understand what humans were capable of when their backs were against the wall. Laura had learned that lesson over the next 30 years. She had watched humanity transform itself from a member of the Coalition into something entirely different, something harder and stronger and more focused. The silent years, they called them later. 30 years when humanity spoke to no one and built in secret and prepared for a future that everyone else thought would never come. Laura rose through the ranks during those years. She commanded frigates and then cruisers and then battleships. She watched as the shipyards of Mars and Luna expanded until they stretched across entire orbits. She watched as Earth's best scientists and engineers poured everything into weapons research and ship design and tactical systems. Every resource was directed toward one goal: survival through overwhelming force. If humanity was going to be alone, then humanity would be strong enough that no one would dare threaten them. Admiral Laura Bennett now stood in the orbital shipyards above Mars and looked at what 30 years of focused effort had created. The ships stretched in every direction as far as she could see. Titan-class dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the Coalition had ever built. Each one was 2 miles long and bristled with weapons that could shatter planets. Wraith-class stealth carriers that could move through space invisible to any known sensor system. Hammer-class assault ships designed for one purpose, which was to deliver overwhelming firepower at close range. And thousands of smaller vessels. Cruisers and destroyers and frigates and corvettes. A fleet larger than anything humanity had possessed before the isolation. A fleet built in secret, while the galaxy forgot about Earth. Chief Engineer Greg Lawson walked beside Laura through the command center. He was a short man with graying hair and oil stains on his uniform. He had spent 15 years designing the reactor systems that powered the new ships. Final weapons systems check complete on Battle Group 7, Greg reported. All reactors are online and operating at peak efficiency. All ships report ready for deployment. Laura nodded and looked at the tactical display showing the positions of every ship in the fleet. 1,500 warships total. It was a number that would have been impossible 30 years ago, but humanity had learned to do impossible things. General Carlos Mendoza stood on the other side of the display. He commanded Earth's Marine forces, and he looked like a man built for war. Tall and broad-shouldered with scars on his face from battles fought in training exercises that were almost as brutal as real combat. "The fleet is ready, but we need to talk about this decision," Carlos said. "The Coalition abandoned us. They cast us out and told us we were not wanted. Now you want to risk everything to save them. Why?" Laura understood his anger because she felt it too. The betrayal still stung even after 30 years. But she had learned something about leadership during her time in command. Sometimes you had to put aside personal feelings and look at the bigger picture. Because the Krell will not stop with the coalition, Laura said. We have been monitoring the war from the edge of their space. We have seen how they fight and how they conquer. They do not negotiate and they do not show mercy. If they destroy the coalition, then they will turn their eyes toward Earth. Better to fight them now while we still have potential allies than face them alone later when they are even stronger. Carlos did not look convinced, but he nodded. And what if the coalition refuses our help? What if they are still afraid of us? Then they die, Laura said bluntly. But we will have tried. We will have offered them a chance. That is more than they gave us. Dr. Helen Cross joined them at the display. She was the director of the weapons development program, and she had personally designed half the systems that made the new fleet so deadly. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped working on problems. I have been running simulations of the battle at Refuge Station, Helen said. The coalition fleet will be outnumbered at least 8-1 based on Krell deployment patterns. They have perhaps 1 hour of combat capability before they are overwhelmed. If we are going to intervene, we need to move now. Laura looked at the chronometer. Earth Command had given her the authorization to deploy 12 hours ago, but she had waited to make sure every ship was ready. There would be no second chance at this. No time to repair mistakes or fix problems. They had to arrive ready to fight and ready to win. All battle group commanders report to your flagships. Laura spoke into the fleet communication channel. Prepare for immediate deployment. Set course for Refuge Station. We jump in 30 minutes. Across the shipyards, 1,500 ships began to move. Crews rushed to their stations and captains gave final orders, and the massive vessels turned toward the jump coordinates. Laura transferred to her flagship, which was a Titan-class dreadnought, named the USS Redemption. The name had been her choice. Humanity was going to redeem itself in the eyes of the galaxy, or die trying. Either outcome was better than hiding behind their borders while others fought and died. The Redemption's bridge was a cathedral of technology. Holographic displays showed every system and every weapon and every ship in the fleet. Laura sat in the command chair and looked at her officers. They were the best humanity had to offer. Trained in tactics that had been refined over 30 years of intense study, veterans of simulation battles that had pushed them to their limits. They were ready for this. Earth was ready for this. Navigation confirmed jump coordinates, Laura ordered. Weapons bring all systems online. Communications prepare a message to transmit on all coalition frequencies when we arrive. She paused and looked at the tactical display one more time. The Krell fleet would be at Refuge Station soon. The coalition defenders would be desperate and outmatched. They would be expecting to die. They would not be expecting salvation to arrive from the species they had cast out. Launch all ships, Laura commanded. Jump on my mark. The fleet moved as one toward the jump point. Massive rift generators tore holes in space, creating passages that would carry them across light years in moments. It was technology that humanity had improved during the isolation. The coalition's jump drives could move a few ships at a time, but human drives could move entire fleets. Another advantage built in secret. Another weapon that the galaxy did not know existed. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Space tore open in 1,500 places simultaneously, and the human war fleet vanished forever. On the Sol system, behind them Earth waited and watched. Billions of people monitoring the communications channels, hoping for news, hoping that their military had not just gone to die for people who did not deserve saving, but also hoping that humanity would prove it was better than the coalition had believed, that when others needed help, humans would answer the call regardless of past grievances. Laura sat in her command chair as the Redemption traveled through the rift. The journey would take 6 hours. 6 hours to cross the distance between Earth and Refuge Station. 6 hours to prepare for a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. She thought about the Coalition Council and how they had looked at humanity with fear and suspicion. She thought about President Hayes and his defiant speech. She thought about 30 years of isolation and hard work and sacrifice. And she thought about the message she had prepared to transmit when they arrived. It was simple and direct. This is Admiral Laura Bennett of the United Earth Fleet. We received your distress call. Humanity has come. The coalition had cast them out, but humanity was about to show them something important. Sometimes the people you push away are the ones who save you when all hope is gone. Sometimes strength is not something to fear, but something to be grateful for. And sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating what humans will do when given a chance to prove themselves. The Krell were about to learn that lesson. The Coalition was about to learn it too, and the galaxy was about to see what happened when you back humanity into a corner and then threaten everything they had ever fought beside. You get an armada. You get vengeance. You get hope bursting from the void like thunder. The Krell Dominion had conquered 17 star systems without ever facing real resistance. Their warlords had grown fat on victory, and their admirals had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that could truly hurt them. Warlord Thrak commanded the assault fleet from his flagship Desolation, and he had already begun planning how he would divide the spoils from Refuge Station. The Coalition was broken, and their last fleet was a joke. This would be over in less than an hour, and then his forces could move on to the core worlds. When his sensors detected the spatial anomalies behind his formation, he felt only mild curiosity. Perhaps another Coalition fleet had arrived to die with the rest. It would make no difference. Unknown vessels emerging from rift space, his tactical officer reported. The officer was a junior warlord named Kretch, who had served under Thrak for 5 years. Identify them immediately, Thrak ordered. He did not like surprises, even small ones. Kretch worked his console and his mandibles began clicking in confusion. Configuration unknown. No match in our database. Reading 1,500 capital ships with full escort screens. This is a complete invasion force. 1,500 ships. Thrak felt the first stirring of something he had not experienced in years. Concern. No species in the Coalition had that many vessels. He had studied their fleet compositions carefully before this campaign. Could this be another Dominion encroaching on his conquest? That would be problematic, but not catastrophic. He would negotiate or fight depending on which option served him better. Send a standard Dominion challenge, Thrak commanded. Demand their identification and purpose. But before Kretch could comply, the sensors lit up with new contacts. They are launching fighters, Kretch said. His voice had risen slightly. Thousands of fighters, and their capital ships are powering weapons. All of them. They are preparing to attack. Thrak stood from his command throne. The entire fleet. Battle stations. Turn to face this new threat. Use formation Delta 7. The Krell Armada began to turn like a great beast rousing from sleep. 800 ships moving to face the unknown fleet that had appeared behind them. But they were caught in a bad position. The Coalition fleet was ahead, and now this massive force was behind. Thrak had fought enough battles to recognize a pincer movement when he saw one. On the bridge of the USS Redemption, Admiral Laura Bennett watched the Krell fleet begin its turn. They were reacting exactly as her tactical analysts had predicted. The Krell were arrogant, but they were not stupid. They would try to eliminate the larger threat first, which meant focusing on the human fleet. That was fine. That was exactly what Laura wanted. All ships, this is Bennett. She spoke across the fleet channel. Execute Operation Thunderclap. Show them what happens when you corner humanity. Show them what we built while they forgot about us. The human armada split into 3 massive formations. The center group drove straight at the Krell fleet, while the left and right groups curved outward to envelope the enemy flanks. It was a classic hammer and anvil tactic, but executed on a scale that would have been impossible for any other fleet. The dreadnoughts opened fire first. Magnetic accelerator cannons that had been designed in secret and built in the hidden shipyards of Mars now spoke with voices like thunder. Projectiles the size of small ships accelerated to 30% of light speed and crossed the distance to the Krell fleet in seconds. The first volley hit 6 Krell cruisers, and the results were devastating. The kinetic energy was so immense that the ship simply disintegrated. Metal and flesh and technology converted to superheated plasma in an instant. Thrak watched 3 of his ships vanish from the tactical display and felt something cold settle in his chest. "What weapons are those?" he demanded. Kretch was staring at his instruments in disbelief. "Kinetic accelerators. But the velocity is impossible. No species should be able to generate that much force. Who are these people?" The human fleet kept coming. Plasma lance batteries added their fire to the magnetic cannons. Beams of contained fusion cut through space and carved through Krell armor like it was not even there. And then came the missiles. Thousands upon thousands of guided warheads launching from every human ship. They swarmed toward the Krell fleet in waves so dense they blocked out the stars. The Krell point defense systems tried to stop them. Laser grids and interceptor drones and countermeasure fields all worked frantically to clear the incoming storm. But there were too many missiles coming too fast. Hundreds got through, and when they detonated, the Krell fleet began to die. Ship after ship exploded or lost power or broke apart under the assault. Thrak had never seen anything like this, never faced an enemy with such overwhelming firepower. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks flew his fighter through the chaos and tried to keep his mind focused on his job. The human fighters were faster than anything he had ever flown against. They moved through the battle space with impossible precision, coordinating their attacks without any apparent communication. Kevin stayed tight on the wing of his human flight leader and followed every move. The combined human and coalition fighter screen drove like a spear toward the Krell flagship. Enemy fighters tried to intercept them, but the humans tore through them with contemptuous ease. Their weapons were more accurate and their pilots were better trained. Kevin shot down 2 Krell fighters and watched a human pilot destroy 5 in the same time. These people had spent 30 years preparing for war, and it showed in every aspect of their combat performance. Commander Jake Harrison watched from the bridge of the Eternal Hope as the human fleet systematically dismantled the Krell Armada. Admiral Liu had ordered the coalition ships to advance and add their fire to the attack. It felt good to be advancing instead of retreating. It felt good to see the enemy dying instead of his own people. A Krell destroyer exploded off their port side as 3 human cruisers focused fire on it. The wreckage spun away, trailing atmosphere and bodies. All weapons fire at will, Jake ordered. Target any enemy ship that looks damaged and finish them off. Let the humans know we are still in this fight. The Eternal Hope's plasma cannons opened up and contributed their firepower to the slaughter, because that was what this was. Not a battle. A slaughter. Warlord Thrak tried to organize a counterattack, but his fleet was falling apart. Ships that had conquered worlds were now fleeing in panic. His own flagship shuddered as something massive struck the shields. Forward shields at 60%. Kretsch reported. Multiple hits on decks 7 through 12. We are venting atmosphere. Another volley of human missiles detonated against the Desolation's hull. The ship rocked and alarm screamed. Thrak made a decision he had never thought he would make. All ships retreat, he commanded. Jump to rally point Sigma immediately. But the order came too late for many of his vessels. A human dreadnought emerged from the chaos directly ahead. Its hull was marked with white letters that spelled USS Vengeance. The name was appropriate. The Vengeance's main gun fired. The magnetic accelerator round crossed the space between the 2 ships in less than a heartbeat. It struck the Desolation dead center, punching through shields and armor like they were made of paper. The round passed completely through the flagship and out the other side, carrying half the ship's structure with it. Thrak had just enough time to feel surprise before the Desolation broke apart around him. The command deck decompressed and he was sucked into space along with everyone else. His last thought was a question. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? And why had no one warned the Krell that such a terrible enemy existed? Then the cold and the vacuum took him and he knew no more. Across the battlefield, the Krell fleet disintegrated. Some ships managed to jump away, but most did not. The human fleet pursued them with ruthless efficiency. Admiral Bennett had given clear orders. No Krell ship leaves this system alive. We send a message today. We show them that humanity does not forgive and does not forget. Every fleet that crosses us will meet the same fate. Her battle groups spread out, hunting down the fleeing enemy vessels. It took 4 hours to finish the job. 4 hours of running battles and desperate chases through the outer system. But when it was over, 800 Krell ships had been reduced to scrap and debris. The great armada that had conquered so many worlds was gone. The human fleet had lost 12 ships. 12 out of 1,500. It was a victory so complete that it seemed impossible. Kevin Brooks brought his fighter back to the Eternal Hope because the human carriers were too far away. His hands were shaking as he climbed out of the cockpit. Vera landed beside him, and when she emerged from her fighter, she was laughing. We won, she kept saying. We actually won. Other pilots were celebrating around them. Coalition and human crews mixing together and sharing stories of the battle. Kevin looked up at the stars and saw the human dreadnoughts holding position near Refuge Station. Those massive ships had saved them. Humanity had saved them. He wondered how the Coalition would ever repay such a debt. On the bridge of the Redemption, Admiral Laura Bennett allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The tactical display showed green icons for friendly ships and nothing but debris where the Krell fleet had been. Communications receive any messages from the Coalition command? She asked. The officer nodded. Admiral Liu is requesting permission to come aboard. She wishes to speak with you personally. Laura smiled slightly. Grant permission. Prepare the shuttle bay to receive her. And someone find a bottle of something worth celebrating with. Today, humanity proved something important. We proved that the coalition was wrong to fear us, wrong to cast us out. We are not the enemy. We never were. We are the ones who stand against the darkness when no one else can. 3 million civilians on Refuge Station watched the battle through long-range sensors and live feeds from the defense fleet. They saw the human ships arrive and they saw the Krell die, and when the last enemy vessel exploded, they erupted in celebration. Families held each other and cried. Strangers embraced in the corridors. Children who had been born during the war and known nothing but fear finally felt safe. They did not know much about humans. Most of them had never even met one. But they knew that humanity had come across the galaxy to save them. That was enough. That would always be enough. And on every world that received news of the battle, the reaction was the same. Shock and disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. The coalition had been saved by the species they had rejected. History would remember this day. The day when all hope had faded and a human war armada burst from the void to light the darkness, with the fire of vengeance and justice and unbreakable will. The Coalition Council convened in emergency session 3 days after the battle. The meeting chamber aboard Refuge Station was filled with representatives from every surviving species, and the air was thick with tension and uncertainty. At the center of the room stood Admiral Laura Bennett, flanked by General Carlos Mendoza and Dr. Helen Cross. They wore their dress uniforms, which were dark blue with silver trim and the emblem of United Earth on their chests. Laura could feel every eye in the room on her. Some looked at her with gratitude and others with fear, and many with a mixture of both. She understood. Humanity had just demonstrated military power beyond anything the coalition possessed. That was frightening, even when that power had been used to save lives. Admiral Liu spoke first. She looked older than she had before the battle. The stress of the war had carved lines into her face, but her eyes were clear and her voice was strong. Humanity saved us, she said simply. Without their intervention, we would all be dead or enslaved. We owe them a debt that cannot be repaid with mere words. The council chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. But then Councillor Venn rose to speak. He was a crystalline being from the Luminar Collective, and his body refracted light in sharp angles. His voice was cold and precise. You disappeared for 30 years, he said, looking directly at Laura. You built a war fleet in secret that dwarfs our combined forces. You developed weapons technology far beyond anything we possess. And now you return expecting what exactly? Gratitude, forgiveness, a place back in the coalition you abandoned. Laura had expected this. She had known that not everyone would be happy about humanity's return. Some would see them as saviors, but others would see them as a threat. She met Ven's gaze without flinching. We expect nothing, she said clearly. We came because it was the right thing to do, not because we wanted your approval or your thanks. The Krell were going to destroy you, and then they would have come for Earth. We fought them here because fighting them later would have cost more lives. Human lives. Coalition lives. We made a tactical decision based on strategic necessity. Ven's crystalline structure seemed to darken. Then why did you come at all? If you were content to hide behind your borders, why emerge now? Why not let the coalition fall and deal with the Krell on your own terms? General Mendoza stepped forward before Laura could respond. His voice was rough with barely controlled anger. Because despite everything, some of us remembered what the coalition once stood for, he said. We remembered fighting beside your people. We remembered the ideals you claimed to believe in. Peace through cooperation, strength through unity, protection for those who cannot protect themselves. You cast us out because you were afraid of what we might become, but we never forgot what you were supposed to be. We came to defend that idea even if you had given up on it yourselves. The chamber went silent. Mendoza's words hung in the air like an accusation. Several counselors looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Dr. Helen Cross spoke next. Her voice was calmer but no less intense. Let us be clear about something, she said. Humanity did not build this fleet to conquer anyone. We built it to survive. For 30 years we lived with the knowledge that we were alone in a hostile galaxy. We had no allies and no trading partners and no one who would come to our aid if we were attacked. So we did what humans do. We adapted. We innovated. We prepared. Every ship and every weapon and every system you saw in that battle was designed for defense. The fact that it proved effective in offense is simply a bonus. Ven's light pulsed with agitation. Defense, he said. 1,500 warships is not defense. That is the foundation of an empire. What is to stop humanity from turning those weapons on us? What guarantee do we have that you will not become the very threat we feared 30 years ago? Laura felt her patience wearing thin, but she kept her voice level. You have no guarantee, she said bluntly. You never did. When we were part of the coalition, you had no guarantee we would not turn against you. You based your fear on suspicion rather than evidence. We had never attacked a coalition member. We had never threatened anyone. But you looked at our military and decided we were dangerous. So you gave us an ultimatum: disarm or be cast out. We chose to leave rather than make ourselves vulnerable. And now you want guarantees from us. She shook her head. The only guarantee I can give you is this: humanity will defend itself and its interests. Always. If that aligns with coalition interests, then we will work together. If it does not, then we will go our separate ways again. But we will never disarm, and we will never apologize for being strong enough to survive. The council chamber erupted in argument. Some representatives demanded that humanity be readmitted immediately. Others insisted on conditions and restrictions. A few suggested that the human fleet should be placed under coalition command. That last suggestion made Laura laugh out loud. The sound cut through the noise and everyone fell silent. Place our fleet under your command, she said. The same command structure that lost nearly every battle against the Krell. The same leadership that was ready to surrender when we arrived. With all respect to Admiral Liu, who fought brilliantly with what she had, you want us to hand over the most powerful military force in the galaxy to a council that has proven unable to use military force effectively. That will never happen. We will cooperate as equals or not at all. Admiral Liu stood and raised her hand for silence. The council gradually quieted. She looked around the chamber and then turned to face Laura. The coalition made a mistake 30 years ago, Liu said. We let fear guide our decisions instead of wisdom. We saw humanity's strength and we were afraid of it. We should have celebrated that strength. We should have learned from it. Instead, we tried to suppress it, and when humanity refused, we cut them out of our family. She paused and her voice grew softer. I was there when the decision was made. I voted in favor of the ultimatum. I believed we were doing the right thing. I was wrong. We were all wrong. And we have paid for that mistake with thousands of ships and millions of lives. Humanity has paid nothing. They built themselves into something stronger while we grew weaker, and yet they came to save us anyway. That is not the action of an enemy. That is the action of an ally we do not deserve. The chamber was completely silent now. Liu turned back to the council. I propose that humanity be welcomed back into the coalition immediately, with full rights and privileges. No conditions, no restrictions, no demands for disarmament or oversight. They have earned the right to be treated as equals, more than equals, as honored members who saved us when we needed them most. And I further propose that we reorganize our military command structure with human advisors in key positions, not to control our forces but to teach us how to be better at defending ourselves, because clearly we have much to learn. Councillor Venn started to object, but another councillor cut him off. I second the proposal. The vote was called and the council chamber filled with representatives raising their hands or appendages, or signaling agreement in whatever way their species used. The tally was overwhelming. 17 species voted in favor. Only the Luminar Collective abstained. Humanity was welcomed back into the Galactic Coalition. On Earth, President Margaret Collins watched the vote broadcast live and felt tears running down her face. She had led humanity through the darkest years of isolation. She had made the hard decisions about resource allocation and military buildup. She had authorized the construction of ships that drained the economy and weapons programs that consumed entire budgets. And she had done it all knowing that many humans questioned whether it was worth it. Whether they should spend so much on preparing for a war that might never come. Now she had her answer. It was worth it. Every sacrifice and every credit spent and every year of isolation had been worth it, because humanity had been ready when the moment came. She addressed the planet on every channel. For 30 years we stood alone, she said. We built our strength in silence, wondering if the galaxy would ever need us again. Today we have our answer. The coalition did not just need our ships or our weapons. They needed our commitment to stand against evil no matter the cost. She continued speaking directly to the billions watching. Some will say we should have let the coalition fall, that we should have stayed hidden and safe behind our borders. But that is not who we are. Humans do not hide when others are in danger. We stand up, we fight. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. And when all hope fades, we show the galaxy what it means to refuse surrender. Our ancestors came from a world that tried to kill them at every turn. They survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. They passed that strength down to us. And today we use that strength not for conquest or domination, but for salvation. Today humanity proved that we deserve our place among the stars. Not because we are strong, but because we choose to use that strength for good. Aboard the USS Redemption, Admiral Laura Bennett stood at the viewport watching Earth rotate slowly below. Commander Jake Harrison stood beside her. He had transferred to the human fleet as a liaison officer to help coordinate operations between coalition and human forces. "Do you think it will last?" Jake asked quietly. "The peace between humanity and the coalition. Will we really be able to work together, or will old fears resurface?" Laura considered the question carefully. "Peace is never permanent," she said. "There will be other threats and other wars. The Krell will regroup and return. Other enemies will emerge from the darkness. Species will disagree and tensions will rise. That is the nature of civilization. But the coalition is not alone anymore. And humanity has learned that isolation, while safe, is not living. We are stronger together than apart. We always were. It just took a war to remind everyone of that fact." She gestured at the fleet visible through the viewport. Human and coalition ships now flew in joint formations. Mixed crews trained together, learning from each other. Human engineers shared technology while coalition scientists offered new theories. It was not perfect. There were still tensions and misunderstandings. Some humans resented being asked to help the people who had cast them out. Some coalition species still feared human military power. But they were trying. That was what mattered. They were building something new from the ashes of the old. Jake nodded slowly. "My people have a saying," he said. "In the darkest night, even the smallest light can guide you home." Laura smiled. "Humanity has one too," she replied. "No one fights alone." Far across the galaxy in the dark territories of the Krell Dominion, a new warlord named Vrak rose to power. He studied the reports from the battle at Refuge Station with cold calculation. The defeat had cost the Krell their forward fleet, but their empire remained vast. They still controlled dozens of systems and commanded millions of warriors. The loss was significant, but not crippling. More importantly, they had learned valuable intelligence about their new enemy. Humanity was strong, very strong. Their weapons technology was advanced and their tactical doctrine was sophisticated, but they were not invincible. Every species had weaknesses. Vrak would find humanity's weakness, and when he did, the Krell would return. Next time they would be ready. Next time they would not underestimate the humans. Next time the outcome would be different. But humanity knew the Krell would return. Admiral Bennett had already begun planning for the next conflict. She met with Admiral Liu and the Coalition Military Council to discuss defensive strategies. They established joint patrol routes and shared intelligence networks. They built new shipyards and training facilities. They prepared for the war that was coming because they all knew it was coming. The Krell would not forget their defeat, and they would not forgive. But neither would humanity. And neither would the coalition. When the Krell returned, they would face not a fractured alliance of peaceful species, but a united front. A coalition that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger. A coalition with humanity at its side. Ready, willing, unafraid. And the galaxy would remember, forever, the day when all hope had faded in a human war. Armada burst from the void to light the darkness, with the fire of defiance and the promise that no evil would go unchallenged, so long as humans drew breath and stood watch.